Welcome back, everybody. Expanding the Zone. Shane Combs alongside Matt Combs, and we're on to episode 82. Believe it or not, it's our fifth show here in season 8. And Matt, as the beat rolls on, as one of our favorite announcers of all time used to say, we we continue down a path of some leadership and trying to gauge some success, trying to have success. One thing that's been on our mind here over the last week or so, as you and I have been talking off the air a little bit, is getting out of the way of winning or things that get in the way of winning. I might even give the title name up to you a little bit, but maybe get us started tonight by giving us some little idea of what brought this topic on.
Yeah, we always talk about, or oftentimes we've had show topics that have to do with, different things in leadership. A lot of times, obviously, it's tied into sports teams and coaching and things like that. Um, a positive way to look at it would be like, what things do you have to do to win? I guess maybe tonight we're looking at it from more the pessimistic way, but things that interfere, just things that interfere with winning. You see it all the time when you watch maybe your favorite teams play or just watch professional teams, college teams, and you kind of stop and think, man, that something lacking here. Like kind of what's in the way, and you obviously see it at the high school level. I think you even see it in organizations. People may see it in their workplace. People may have seen it in their workplace, maybe at another job or whatever, where just, we've all been in those situations where we have organizations we're a part of, you can just sort of feel it that it's good, right? And things are moving in a positive direction, and then vice versa. And I guess we're going to be talking about the vice versa tonight a little bit in terms of just things that interfere or get in the way of success.
Yeah, it's funny, I was putting some notes together and I was watching the section on Scott Van Pelt, the bad beats. And
Uh-huh.
honestly, I'm not much of a gambler or whatever, but I do think those are funny. He'll always talk about the bad beats, and I always look at it from the standpoint of, well, what if you bet the other way? That's a great win, right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of it's interesting that you start that way because there really is two ways to look at it. What gets in the way of winning, or what allows you to get down the right path and to be successful. As I said in the opening, there we're on the show 82, so obviously you and I have been at this a while. And in our recent show, show 81, we were talking about Cincinnati Reds, and we were talking about when it rains, it doesn't have to pour. And we were talking about adversity, and we were talking about how, in that case, our favorite team starts the year like 20-11. They're winning basically two thirds of their games, and then over, the last, month or so, they've been losing two-thirds of their games, and it does kind of lead you to some of these different things on why that is. And I thought we did a pretty good job of laying that out in the last show. There's a lot of different reasons why, but I think one thing that you and I consistently come back to, and it's where I want to start this evening, is identity. I hear you talk a lot about that, and I think sometimes when you don't have something, for lack of a better phrase, that maybe you can hang your hat on. I think I'm paraphrasing here, but because I didn't listen back to our last show, but I remember you saying something when we recorded that show about what can you count on. I mean,
Mhm.
every time you go into a practice, every time you go into a game, or every time you go to a day of work, what is it that you can count on some of the identity? Maybe for people that haven't had a chance to listen to that show or haven't maybe followed our show before, I think it's a great foundation. Why don't you give us a quick answer on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think one, it's, the identity is what is obviously important to your team or your organization. I heard a coach one time say at a clinic I was at, just listening to him speak, if somebody walked into your practice within the first half hour, they should have a really good idea of what you're all about. What things are important to you as a coach. Um, and that always sort of stuck with me. That wow, what if it's a weird day that we're not working on something but what he was saying is whatever you feel strongly about will automatically kind of ooze out of your style of leadership, right? So like if you think as a basketball coach, communication's important, or positivity is important or whatever. Even no matter what you're working on that day in practice, you, people are going to be able to see that in you as a leader and kind of see your kids doing that with each other, right? That's what he was talking about. So the first part of identity, I think, is stuff that is obviously important to you. That when I say obviously, it just shows up. People notice it immediately. And then I think the second part of that, Shane, is your style or your approach. If it's an athletic thing, it can literally be what style of play, right, that you rally around. Are you a full court press, fast break team in basketball? Do you run the ball 75% of the time in football and, line up and really try to control the line of scrimmage, right? In baseball, are you a team that steals bases, that hit and runs, that play small ball? Are you a team that sits back and wait and slugs, and tries to hit with power? All these things I think go into your identity also, which would be like the approach. So they're the things that are important to you, and they're the things, or the way I should say, that you go about your business. And I think those two things, Shane, in turn, kind of give you what you can depend on and what you can count on. We talked about that last week. Like, I think successful teams have something that they just know, okay, good or bad tonight, we're going to be able to count on this. If as a basketball team, the basketball team I coached last year, we were fortunate to say, okay, no matter what we do tonight, I think we're going to be able to guard people. We're not just going to come out here and give up a bunch of points. We're going to guard. So if we have a bad shooting night, we still got a shot, right? Maybe in baseball, it's like, hey, we know our starting pitching is going to give us a chance to win every night. Um, we know if we get to the seventh inning with a lead, our bullpen's going to give us a chance to win. Those are the types of things I'm talking about in terms of what you can count on. So I think all those things sort of melt, I guess, Shane, into your identity.
It's a really interesting place to start because it got me thinking about one of my favorite lessons I used to do early in the year in my ELA classes. Over the last 5 years or so, I've been into administration. Before then, spent about 20 years in the classroom, and most of my teaching experience was in ELA. And I would do this lesson with middle school kids where we would take article adjectives and we would take like a, and, or the. Okay. So, and we would just start as simple, the most basic thing of if students walked into a room and I said, sit in a chair or sit in the chair, that means two different things, right? It
Mhm.
means something completely different. And the point we are making is how one word could be that detailed and so forth. I say that to say this. I heard a speaker once last year at a professional development talk about there's a lot of people that can state a problem. There's a lot there's less people that can state the problem. There's even less people that have a solution to the problem, and then there's even less than that that play an active role in the solution to the problem. I wanted to throw those at you because don't you think that's part of a little bit of what we're talking about here? When you start to break those things down, sometimes when things start going the wrong way, when you don't have an identity, and that's where I wanted to tie this back in,
Mhm.
when you don't have the identity or you don't have some of those staples that you hang your hat on, I think that's where it gets you guessing a little bit. I think guessing's a really scary thing for leaders to do sometimes. I'll circle back to that in a second, but I wanted to ask you about the a problem and the problem and people being a part of the solution or not even being close to part of it, because that's when you can start getting people going in a lot of different directions. And that's when what should have been, I think, as we talked about last week, maybe a small problem, that's where it becomes a really big problem. It can start to spiral out of control. Do you follow that analogy that I'm trying to link to your identity there?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think as we get into some of these things we're going to talk about tonight, Shane, I think some of that's going to come into what you're saying right there. I'd never heard that before, but that's actually a really cool way to lay that out. I like that. I think we'll try to write that down so I have it. But because you're right. I mean, it's there's a bunch of people that can point out a problem, right? And we see that all the time. But when you circle all the way to the other end of that thing, that someone's an active part of a solution, it's a lot more rare. And I think, you said something about you said something about things, maybe not, or people guessing or whatever, and not. I think, I heard one time somebody say clear is kind, right? Like being clear is kind in leadership, even if it's something people don't want to hear. Um, I think the truth, and you've said it a million times, you're not going to call me a liar or whatever. You may not like what I say, but
Right.
and I think that's where that honesty comes into play, and that um, that clear cut path that we're going to take forward comes into, in terms of your leader.
Yeah, I wanted to give you a chance to talk on that, and I wanted to circle back to something I kind of teased there a little bit in terms of leadership and guessing. Matt, I know sometimes you have to maybe make an educated guess, and I'm not saying there's not times where daggone it, you just don't know and you're trying your best to do whatever. But I think in leadership, there's something to be said for you are in that position for a reason, right? Somebody on your team thinks you're very qualified to do that, or they think you have the skill set or the personality or whatever it is to lead that particular group. You, as a coach, sometimes you might put some seniors or some captains or some different people in charge of certain things, and you're trusting that in a moment that maybe you're not there, that their voice will represent what you would want them to say, that type of thing, right?
Right.
And I think sometimes guessing is a scary thing. I think you have to learn to trust your experience, all that you've been through, trust your ability, and make decisions all in and then sell it to the group. I think a lot of times what happens is when leaders give kind of a 50-50, they almost kind of build in the excuse of, well, I was never really confident in this in the first place. I think that's a scary way to go too. Um, I guess I'm kind of up in the air on that a little bit, but it's one of the first things I put down in my notes this week. Can you build off that for me? Because am I wrong there? I think guessing and not being confident in the decision that you've decided to go with can really send a bad message to your group.
Yeah, I think sometimes, you see different organizations, different teams, um, change for the sake of change, right? Or just, okay, this didn't work, we're going to try this. This didn't work, we're going to try this. And a lot of times, it's just sort of throwing stuff at a wall and hoping that something sticks, right? And and you're not really getting, you're sort of just spinning your tires. And I think some of that comes down, Shayne, I don't know what your thought is on this, but like I think some of that comes down to like maybe a lack of a clear vision, of what you're wanting your group to be. And I know we throw around like one of the popular terms today is sort of a shared vision, right? We want our teams or our groups, even in the workplace, ideally, we want that to be a collaborative effort, right? Where we create this vision that we want. But I think sometimes it's not even as important that it's shared, um, as long as it's clear, because I think there are certain situations where you can't get the opinion of everybody and you just have to go with something. Like you said, the leader sometimes have to, like, I mean, I'll just jump to a maybe extreme example of this. Take our military, take our U.S. military. I can't imagine that's necessarily a shared collaborative vision. I think it's like, here's what we're going to tell you to do, and you're going to do it, right? When you, but the message is clear. I can't imagine, when new, um, members of our military and as kids, sign up for the military right out of high school and they go in and they go to boot camp. I would say pretty quickly that's a clear vision of what we want you to do. It may not be shared, you may not have a say in it, but you're going to know. And I
Mhm.
guess what you're talking about here is somewhat like that. Like if we're not, regardless of if we've come up with this together or if this has just been kind of thrown at us, let's at least make sure that it's clear, that it's precise, like we all know where we're going, and like you said, not to waver on it. Because if you start off right from the word go, like you said, with a built-in excuse or with it kind of waffling, yeah, that's probably destined for failure.
Well, it kind of leads us to another point here. Don't you think that that really hurts confidence? Like when we talk about things that get in the way of winning, I think sometimes just the ability to perform or the ability to be confident in who you are and what you want to do can play a big factor. And what more to hurt that particular thing than to see your leadership waver a little bit in terms of he or she not being confident in what they're asking you to do. You know, I think of it from a standpoint of if as a coach, if you're asking a kid to do something and you kind of come across as like, hey, I don't know if you can really do this, but I'm hoping you can. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, that's probably not the best way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, think about it. As a coach, once you decide that, you're really like, hey, I'm going to have you in this role. I think you can do this because I see this in you. I see this in you. I believe in you. Let's go. You know what I mean? Now, that's a whole different set. But when you come across in leadership as we always say, you know, when kids are around you every day, or your your employees or your coworkers or whoever they may be, they know you well enough to know, man, Matt's being kind of fake today. Matt didn't seem real confident in that. When he was throwing that out there today, I don't know if I was buying what he was selling. I think people can identify that, people of all ages. So again, when you're not confident in your vision and you're not sharing it and you're not it hasn't been thought through and you're not saying, here's what we're going to do and here's why we're going to do it. Let's go. I think confidence starts to take a hit, and that certainly can get in the way of being successful.
Yeah, it's funny, Shane, confidence, that could be a topic of its own. I think we've even talked about this on some of our other shows before, but like, confidence is such a crazy thing when you think about it because it's something that, it's got to be real, like you talked about. It's got to be authentic. It can't be just sort of manufactured. Otherwise, it's just fake bravado, right? I mean, you'll see kids sometimes act like they're the most confident people in the world, but they're, really sometimes that's covering up, right? For a lack of confidence. But I agree with a couple things you said right there. One, you know, I've always felt like for players, for instance, confidence comes through preparation. Like if you put in extra work and you
Yeah.
really prepare, I think it naturally lends itself to more confidence. And I think as a leader, it's the same thing. When you talk about presenting something to your group and coming across as confident that it'll work, you're not going to be confident that it'll work if you haven't put in the work to research it, right? To really look into it, to think, okay, this just isn't something I shot from the hip on. I've put in a lot of time, effort, consideration on this. If you're a coach, you watch film, you talk to your assistants, you put together the game plan. We really think this is a way to attack them. And by the time you present that to your team, hopefully you come across as confident because hopefully you are confident because you've put in some time and effort to look into what the best way to do it is. And I think that that's a part of, to me, that's a part of the knack, I guess, of a leader, of being a good leader. I played for a coach in high school, who, for whatever reason, when he would tell us something at halftime or he'd make an adjustment or he'd say, hey, we're going to try this, I just always like when he would like there was just a way he sort of gave it to us that I thought it was going to work. You know what I mean? Like I thought, you know what? And I look back, and sometimes it did work. No, I mean, I'm just being real here. I look
Yeah.
back, sometimes it did work, and I think, man, how did that work? Like, I don't even know if that was like that big a
Yeah.
deal, but it worked, but like he had us believing that this would work. And that's part of the battle, right? Like, as a leader, you've got to be able to command the room, so to speak. And if you can help your people believe that it's going to go, it's going to go. I think that's a big part of confidence for sure. Confidence is fragile too, right? I mean, it can come and go, man, like that. You see it all the time. You see kids go through hitting slumps. What did Don Neff used to say in baseball? You ain't got time to go through a slump in high school baseball. The season's only a month
No,
long. You know what I mean?
no.
But yeah, but you'll see kids go through a little bit of a hitting slump. Um, you'll see it in golf. You'll see it in just different sports where people struggle and it's between the ears, but how do you get that back? It's a crazy thing.
Yeah, it's funny because I think sometimes with excuses, we try to write certain narratives, or we try to do different things, and we always say there's always things that are out of our control. But we say, hey, let's dominate the things that are in our control. Okay. So that's always a funny thing to go back and forth. I want to hit both sides of that. So, like when we talk about things that are out of our control, sometimes I'm going to give you one that we're coming up on. One of the biggest things in the last 5 years in education that's really starting to take off, because some of the different rules and the laws and the accountability that all stakeholders, not just the parent, not just the student, are starting to play a role in, is attendance. And I'm sure you felt this a little
Yeah.
bit in administration
Oh
and
yeah.
so forth. And look, that's something that's really, really tough. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to absolutely 100% force the kid to come to school and sit in the room. But does that mean we just wash our hands of it? That's the whole thing that comes to mind. I think sometimes we see things and we be like, I don't know what to do with that. You know what I mean? It's just like, and we want to write a narrative that immediately kind of gives us an out. Where I think
Mhm.
sometimes, if we truly believe that daggone it, the attendance is a big, big part of learning, and that's going to have a lot to do with those students learning math, learning ELA, learning these skills that we need them to learn, then we've got to do something to get involved and to play as big a role as possible. Don't you feel like sometimes there are narratives that people try to write that almost give them an out before they even start? And I think that's a dangerous way to just compete in life, and certainly when you're involved in leadership.
Yeah, I think it comes down to a form of excuse making, to
Hmm.
me. And I remember the funny thing, when you said that, it just reminded me of something I heard on a podcast one time, that Urban Meyer, when he was coaching at Ohio State, told his assistant coaches. He said, I never want to hear you blame the player. Do not blame these players. Like, do not come in here and tell me these players aren't good enough, is what he was saying, right? He's not saying to don't recognize the player made a mistake, but he's saying, don't come in this room and tell me, well, this kid's just not good enough because you recruited him. I mean, if he's not good enough, you
Yeah.
messed up. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He told his position coaches that. But it's always something that I've tried to adopt. Like, it doesn't do you any good as a coach to blame your guys. Like, don't get me wrong, hold them accountable in practice behind closed doors, but like publicly, and like, what good does that do, right? And it's like you talk about, you create narratives to say, well, these people just aren't good enough to get this done, or we just live in too poor of a school district for that to, you know what I mean? We don't have the resources. We don't have the family structure at home for these kids to come to school every day. We don't, kids don't come to school ready to learn, so they're behind. All those things could be true, right? I mean, factually, there could be some truth to those. But what you're saying is true too. If you go and use those as a crutch, where are you getting, right? I mean, there's nothing to gain by that. To me, I think sometimes it's scary, the possibility of failure. So you give yourself a safety net. I had a kid one time. I had a kid way back when I was teaching. I mean, man, this was 28 years ago, I think 26 years ago. I can remember a kid saying, I didn't care about that test. Yeah, I failed. And he was telling his friends, yeah, I didn't care about that test. He cared. He wanted to pass, but it was easier to say he didn't care than to admit that he failed. Right. So
Hmm.
and if you lose a game, I don't really care that much about this. I don't, you know, it's just sometimes it's easier to create that narrative you're talking about, that little safety net, that little cushion to land on if you fail, rather than to admit, hey, I did my very best and it still wasn't good enough. That's a hard thing to admit sometimes, but I think the only way we can go about it is to try to attack it and say, we're going to do our best.
No, there's no question about it. I remember following two high school golfers about 20 years ago, and both were phenomenal players. I mean, all Ohio level players, college level golfers. And you'd go out and you'd watch them play over the course of a week. And player A was just a pretty basic, down the middle of the green, two putt par type of kid. This other kid had unbelievable amount of talent. and he would try a lot of different things. He'd do a lot of different things, and at the end of the week, oftentimes player B would have maybe hit 8 out of the top 10 shots I'd watched that week, and player A beat him by about 10 shots. You know what I'm saying? Like, but it's one of those things where I think I think sometimes there is a fine line between we almost we almost build in ways to kind of soften the blow a little bit because what if I take that test, Matt? I'm just not good enough. What if I admitted that I want to do well in this test and then didn't get a good grade? Now I got to really look
Right.
myself in the mirror of accountability. Let me flip this to another way on you in terms of afraid to fail. This is something that as I went deeper into my career, I probably became more willing to trust my gut and trust my experience and trust some of those things. So I think that's the number one thing I want to tell people who are listening. This is easy to talk about, but when it talks about trusting your experience and your ability and making decisions all in for the group, because when you're responsible for a group, man, that's hard. You know what I mean? You want to make the
Right.
right call and you want to do the different things. I remember one time we were playing we were playing in the 2021 district championship of the VA. And we were fortunate enough to win district titles in 14 and 15. So we'd been on this stage before and we would go or whatever. But for people that don't know, basically you use your number one pitcher in the semifinal. So when you get into
Mhm.
the second game, the district championship, oftentimes you get into some different matchups. And we had a situation where our second best pitcher was our best catcher, and we were going back and forth or whatever. We got into the middle innings, and if we didn't try something, we were beat
Mhm.
for sure. And I
Mhm.
don't even know what made me do it other than trust for a couple different players where I just basically looked and said, I looked at one player. Well, I'll just say who it is. It's Trent Mettler. It's the new Paint Valley baseball coach at Paint Valley. Right? He was a player at the time. I just looked at him. He's an outstanding player, but he was, a guy who hadn't caught a whole lot. I just said, hey, you got to trust me here. You're going to catch. We put Dax Estep into the mound or whatever. And we ended up coming back in the game. And you look back on it and it worked. I don't even know if it was the right call. It worked that night. But it was
Mhm.
one of those situations where I don't think I could have made that decision, or I don't know if I'd have had the guts to make that decision 10 years earlier in my career. Does that make sense? So, like, I
Mhm.
don't want to come across on here as acting like this is easy. Leadership's hard. So I like
Right.
trust your experience or your ability or to make these decisions all in and sell it to the group. That's what we're all trying to build after. I'm not saying it's easy. You follow what I'm saying? I'm sure you could come up with some similar situations of things that you've done later in your career. One, because you're smarter, right? More experienced. But two, you're probably even a little bit more willing to kind of, hey, I got to do something here. I'm willing to try. I'd rather try this and lose than to sit back and do zero and lose.
Yeah, it's funny, we talked one time, I remember, about what motivates people. Is it sort of, you know, some people are motivated by a fear of failure to an extent,
Yeah.
and some people are motivated by the joy of winning, which I think is probably the healthier way to be. Although I've freely admitted that I'm one of these people that's kind of driven by the fear of failure, and it's kind of a miserable way to operate sometimes as a competitor, because sometimes winning gives you a sense of relief rather than joy, and you don't really ever really enjoy it. But there's a difference, I think, between being motivated by that fear of failure, which means that you don't want to be outworked and you want to make sure you didn't forget to do anything and no stone unturned type deal, versus what you're talking about, being afraid to make a decision in the heat of a moment type thing, right? Being afraid to pull a trigger and make a call. Um, because I think no matter, what type of leader you are in terms of your motivation, when you're in that moment, when you're in the battle, you have to be willing to make decisions that you could regret. Just because otherwise, what are you even there for, right? I mean, like if you're a coach, what are you there for if you're not there to make those decisions, right? So you're going to be faced with those. And look, we've had situations like you're talking about where you make a decision, it works, and we've all had those situations where we make a decision, we think, boy, that blew up in my face. Uh, I remember, I remember we were playing Chillicothe the year they won the state championship game, and Jeff Miller was my assistant at the time down in Vinton County, and we come out after halftime, and Humpty Hitchens, people remember that name, was having his way with us, and I told one of our guys, I was like, listen, we've got to try to set a little bit of a tone. I mean, he's just kind of freely going around doing whatever he wants to do. And I had a hard-nosed defender. I said, hey, I said, I want you to get, physical, not dirty, obviously, but I want you to get up in him, get a little handsy with him, get physical. Well, the kid got up pretty tight on him and got a little too physical, and Humpty started to drive and he got tripped and fell to the ground. They called a foul. You could tell he got up and he was kind of mad. And at that point, I knew it was going to go one way or the other. This kid was going to like get mad and frustrated and maybe lose it a little bit and hurt his team, or he's going to get mad and frustrated and kind of take it out on us. Well, he had like 17 in the third quarter, so that's pretty much you know what it did to him. Like the getting up in him and trying to crank it up a little bit backfired on us. And of course, Jeff, me and Jeff had a great line. He's like, "Yeah, I think we ticked this kid off." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, Jeff, I think we did." But no, I mean, my point is you make decisions
Yeah.
sometimes that don't work too.
Right.
The decision you made that day was, you know, like you said, though, sometimes I said to a coach one time, I said, that was a gutsy call. And he said, it wasn't the gutsy call, it was the only call. And I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I get it. Maybe you're right. Like what seemed like in your case, a gutsy call, putting a kid in that's throwing 80 plus mile an hour and a kid who's hardly ever caught, looks like a gutsy call. But in your mind, what else it's the only call.
Yeah.
I had to make the call. So yeah, I think sometimes that's part of being a leader. That's the lonely part of being a leader is you've got to step out on that ledge sometimes and make those things. And look, we live in a world of Monday morning quarterbacks. You're going to get second guessed. So it's just part of it. You got to know it's coming.
I looked down through my list, Matt, and that's probably all of my new material on the agenda. So if you don't have anything else, I'm going to jump into some final thoughts here. I've got two steps to the final thoughts, and I want to
Mhm.
get your take on both of them. Number one, for people that aren't familiar with the show here on Expanding the Zone, after we talk about this, we always try to leave you with a solution. We don't want to be that person that states a problem, right? We want to state the problem or the problems that we
Mhm.
see, but we want to be a part, play an active role in trying to figure out some solutions and get better and better at this thing called leadership. I think number one, I beg people to never stop learning. I think the longer I go at this, I think the reason I have fallen in love with podcasts, fallen in love with not only listening to podcasts but doing this, the preparation it takes, and us talking this out, and us getting feedback, and then professional development and all these different things is I constantly want to learn because I find myself even 28 to 30 years later, depending on if it's teaching versus coaching, about 30 years later, I find myself in new situations all the time, because it seems like no one leadership situation is the same. Maybe this time I'm leading kids, this time I'm leading adults. Well, maybe with adults, I'm leading some people that are in their first 5 years of doing it, where other people are 30 years into it. And those are two different things, right? And I think what I would challenge people is to never stop learning, never stop reflecting. Make sure that you take the time to evaluate yourself, figure out what worked, what didn't work, and why. But make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that you trust to where you can get honest feedback. I want to start there in terms of don't you feel like that's a huge foundation in anything we talk about in leadership, that if you continue to do your work and study, and put more and more things in your arsenal, like earlier you said you're going to steal that and write it down, right? I find
Right,
myself
right.
doing that all the time.
Oh
you
yeah.
know what's your thoughts on that in terms of how as soon as you stop learning in this particular walk of life, you're really in trouble?
Yeah, I think the best leaders adapt, evolve, get better, learn, come up with different approaches because the landscape of the society is constantly changing, right? Like every time you think you've seen it all, something happens that you haven't seen yet, right? And I mean, there's been a couple things lately, professionally for me
Yeah.
that I'm like, man, I didn't see that coming. You
Yeah, I
know,
agree.
I mean,
Mhm.
it's just, and sometimes in sports, it's even like that, but like, I think that's part of, I think the people who have, I've always respected longevity in leadership a little bit, just the ability to do it for a long period of time, because I think in doing it for a long period of time, you have to adjust and adapt and evolve and get better. And you can't, people that do it for a long period of time typically don't do it the same as they did 20 years ago. And part of it's what you're talking about. They continue to educate themselves, they continue to try to get better. Um, for me, it's fun. To me, listening to a podcast on leadership or coaching or reading a book or those things are enjoyable for me. Um, to me, that's part of the enjoyable part of the process, I guess. I used to love going to coaches clinics, and I say used to because it just seems like there's not as many of those now. I mean, there's still one big one every year that I try to go to for our coaches association. But but if you think about it now, you have a 24/7 coaches clinic called YouTube. Really, I mean, you can just see whatever you want all the time, right? But to me, I used to love going to those and just sitting there and listening to coaches talk and taking notes, even if over the course of an hour long, presentation, you might only get one little nugget, right, that you write down in your notes, but it means something to you. Yeah, that's how you get better. So no, I agree 100%. I think it's part of humility. Like, do you have the humility to admit, hey, I'm not perfect. I don't have this. I haven't arrived. I don't know everything. I have to continue to get better. And I think you owe it to your people. It goes back to that authenticity you talked about of when you're standing up in front of your group, to be able to confidently, or there's that word again, address them and say, "Hey, here's why I think we should do it this way. It's because I've researched it, I've looked at it, I've studied it, I've looked at different approaches, I've talked to people, I've done my homework." Um, yeah, I am 100% Shane on board with that statement for sure.
Hey, I'll get to the second thing in just a second, but I have to circle back to one thing you just talked about in terms of being able to go to clinics and talk to people and different things, and about how we do have a lot of technology at our hands. There's no debating that. But
Mhm.
but I find it interesting the older I get, the unwillingness of adults to get together and talk. Like I see it. I see it sometimes in the workplace with staff meetings, or I see it with teacher work days, or I see it, as you said, coaching clinics, or now let's just vote online instead of going and voting here. Let's do this. Let's do the there has been a lack in the last probably 10 years of my career of getting together. One of my favorite things as a teacher we used to do was what was called LCAP. Okay, we would get together as teachers and we'd have an area wide test for ELA. So all of these seventh grade ELA teachers from all over the county would get together and we'd have a test and we'd go over. The test was great and the data was great. But what I enjoyed more than anything, a couple times a year, getting together with people that from you know men, women, some taught 30 years, some taught 10 years, some taught 5 years, some taught 18 years, and they've just shared ideas. I see this, I try this, and I do think we've lost a little bit of that. And I think if we're not careful, it's not to say we don't have more resources than ever and more material than ever, but I'm afraid sometimes we do get a little robotic. Do you think that's hurt the people skills and leadership? I know that's kind of off the agenda, but when you were saying that, it hit me as something we really need to talk about real quick.
No, I agree. I think two things happen, Shane, when you don't have that. I mean, I think one, just the camaraderie, right? And the fellowship
Yeah,
between
yeah.
colleagues, or I think that's a plus. Like I remember I was so lucky to have this my very first year being a teacher. Um, I was a part of I was at a school that did like team teaching where I was the social studies teacher on our team, and you had your English teacher, your math teacher, your science, your specials, excuse me, all those areas. And we had, in addition to our individual planning period, we had team planning every day. Every single day we had team planning, which put five teachers in a room and talk. And you talk about the benefits of that. Now, were there days we were just shooting the breeze? Yes, there probably were. But were
Yeah.
there days where we were talking about, have you had trouble with Johnny in your class? Yeah, I have. I don't know what's going on. Wonder if he's having some problems at home right now. So you were talking about students, you were talking about approaches. And as a first year teacher, you don't think that was beneficial to me? I learned a lot, right, from more veteran teachers. So I think that's one thing. But I think the second part of that is I think sometimes I don't know if like our veteran, either coaches, teachers, whatever, do maybe there's not as much of a willingness to share. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. At the high school level, I don't think high school coaches share with each other as much as they should. Like I think sometimes it's almost like I got to protect my secrets. I got to keep those in
Yeah.
close, right? I don't want to give somebody an advantage. But at the college level, it's not nearly that way. I think the college level coaches share a lot more and they're willing to grow the game. We were just at a shootout this week at Ashland. Our basketball team went to Ashland University. And part of the reason I went to this shootout is how much respect I have for their coach. And I don't even know their coach very well, John Ellenwood. But I had heard him speak at a clinic years ago. He's really, really good at individual skill development with post players. It's a little bit of a lost art, right, with post guys. Like he's kind of an old school post coach. And and I was really intrigued with what he had talked about at a clinic. But at the time, I didn't have a post player. We were playing five guards. I made a few notes, but it didn't really. Well, then a few years later, like 7, 8 years later, um, man, 5 or 6 years later, I guess, I had a post player. Matter of fact, I had two, and I was going to have to play. So I was looking, I was like, gosh, I was looking for my notes. I couldn't find him. I reached out to him. Not only did he send me stuff, he sent me videos of him working out players individually. I mean, how cool is that, right? I mean, I'm getting these videos of him working out his guys. And my point to all that is the willingness to share. This guy
Yeah.
doesn't really
Yeah.
know me, right, that well. I reach out to him, basically tell him I lost my notes, right? He could have been like, and he sends me all this stuff. And just the willingness to kind of help others get better. And I'm not going to embarrass them by saying their name, but there's a few high school coaches that come to mind in different sports, one in volleyball, another in basketball, that come to mind that have really tried to grow the game by helping younger coaches. And I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And then the second point I wanted to make. So again, number one, we were just talking about never stop learning, always growing, always being willing to learn, always being willing to give back as you learn and bounce ideas off of one another. Then number two, I think has to come back to something we've talked about throughout this show of trust your vision and lead. It has to be when it comes time to lead. Again, you have to be confident that you are in that spot. Make a decision. Don't guess. Like I always say, like I hate seeing the hitter in the batter's box in baseball. They're up there guessing, right? You know what I mean? Like, trust your work and know here's what I think's the best thing to do. Here's why. Let's go. You know what I mean? It's kind of like to use an example of the Cincinnati Reds. You and I were talking earlier this week about how as our favorite baseball team started to struggle, sure, they've gone through some injuries and they've gone through some different things, but it just seems like about every 2 or 3 days, they're like, okay, we'll try these three players and hopefully they get hot. And then if they're
Yeah.
good, they'll stay. And if they're bad, we'll send them right back down, try three other players. Like at some point, at the highest level of baseball, there's people that make a lot of money that are very, very good at their job, you would like to think, or they wouldn't be in that job in the first place, of scouting, of player development, and some different things. At some point, you as a coach have to have a player evaluation that says, "Hey, I think these are the best players. Here's why I think they're the best players. We're going to go with them, and we're going to put them in the best chance." The best place to be successful, and we're going to move forward. Then, after the right amount of time, if that doesn't work, then I'll admit that I'm wrong, and we'll move to the next thing. But I think sometimes I see way too many leaders, they don't even give themselves a chance to be right or wrong, right? So, in other words, they're not even giving themselves a chance to be successful because they never truly go all in with, hey, here's what I believe, here's why, let's do it. Do you see
Mhm.
what I'm saying there?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny. One of the things I had here in my notes that I didn't touch on was when we talked about the identity early on in the show, it's is the leadership identity, the identity of the leader, like that, and it's a little bit of that consistency thing you talked
Yeah.
about, Shane, of knowing what to expect. Because when you have a leader that's constantly all over the place, right, it's kind of hard to, I think, having that consistency that, like the people I've always enjoyed working for the most are the ones that, or even working with, um, are the ones that when you show up every day, you just sort of know what you're getting with them, right? Like, hey, you know, this guy here likes to joke around, likes to keep it loose, this guy here is a little bit more by the book, likes to go, boom, boom, boom. Um, but imagine showing up and every day it's different, right?
Yeah.
That guy that was joking around yesterday is in a terrible mood today. And then the next day he's doing this. And the next day now we're doing this. You'd be all over the place, right? And it's kind of what you're talking about right there. Having some form of a consistent approach. Change is necessary. We just talked about that, but when to change and is important. Are you changing just for the sake of change? Is it just, like I said earlier, throwing stuff at a wall and hoping something sticks? Or is there some sort of approach and some sort of plan? Because I do think you're right in terms of, the leadership identity and the leadership consistency um, is crucial.
Well, it's good stuff. I know my notebook is empty here, and I think this is a time of year. I know a lot of people that we get feedback from is in education, they're in coaching. So the summer serves as a great time to do this. I challenge people to become learners, to invest in their craft and continue to do things. We were just talking in Sunday school this morning about how, you gotta make time, for the things that are most important to you, right? And
Right.
and it's one of those things where you hear a lot of people say, "Well, I don't have time for that." You know what I mean? Where it's like anything else in terms of what you carve out the time to do. And I would challenge leaders here as they go through these summer months. I know a lot of times in the business world, maybe this isn't quote unquote your off season, but I know there's a lot of educators and coaches that do that. And the summer offers you a great time to do that. So Matt, any final thoughts here before I close this out? I thought this was a good show. Hopefully, everybody got something out of it. I know I did.
No, I think we covered everything that I had in my notes and then that we had talked about, um, just sort of presenting here tonight. I think again, sometimes knowing what to do is knowing what not to do, right? Like recognizing what doesn't work sometimes helps us, put together a plan of what will work. So, sometimes you kind of reverse engineer that a little bit. So it's like, I think tonight was good just talking about some of these things we've seen that sort of get in the way of success. And, obviously, we didn't touch on every single one, but I think some of the ones we touched on, hopefully gives people something to think about. It's funny when we do this show, when we do this show too, Shane, it's like I'm reminded of a teacher that once told me, if you can teach it, you really know it. You know what I mean? Like
Uh-huh.
if you're teaching it, then you really know it, or you couldn't teach it. So when we do this, you've said a million times on here that it's professional development for us too.
Yeah.
And so when we do this stuff, it's we're certainly not talking at people like we're talking with people because it's stuff that makes us stop and think, ooh, gosh, maybe we need to do a little bit better job of that too. So it's good for us.
Yeah, again, 82 shows in. If you're new to the show, they're all back there. Some of them are linked to certain time things that maybe happen in the world of sports or the world in general at that time. But I think just about any show that you listen to at any time would certainly have the same type of leadership meaning. Make sure you subscribe to where you get all those. And then I also want to throw out that just come to the end of a year with SOSA, Southern Ohio Sports Authority, where John Bruce and we do SOSA overtime, and that's over on the SOSA YouTube page. Check that out because John and I talk a lot of things, and we just actually recorded our final SOSA overtime of the year today. And we were talking about the 7 divisions that you and I talked about and how it's really helped in a lot of different ways. So a lot of times you get some of those crossover things and some different things there. So encourage people to do that. So On that note, we're going to get on out of here. Again, make sure you subscribe to where you're keeping up with expanding the zone throughout the summer. And Matt and I will continue to come up with topics and throw them out there. And we appreciate your feedback. So for Matt, I'm Shayne. So long, everyone.